My name is Zalewski. I'm with Realty One Group Peak in Bozeman.
And I'm Kaila Henry, also at Realty One Group Peak.
Right. And so today we were talking about offers. From a seller's perspective, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and we just kind of want to remove the veil and tell you kind of what we do as agents and what sellers should be, what the expectations that you can have about what the process is once we get an offer, whether it gets accepted or not, kind of what we do behind the scenes to make sure that all the steps are taken to, if there's multiple offer situations, but even if there's just one offer, to make sure that that buyer is most able to perform.
Yeah.
So I guess, so you're the list agent, Kaila, and you get an offer for your listing. Now what?
I guess first and foremost, I like to go back through my list of people that have showed the house and see if there were anybody who was like, hey, my clients, we're looking at a few other places, but keep me in the loop. So I like to kind of review that list and just see if there was maybe even any second showings. And I always like to call or text those agents and just let them know we have an offer in hand. Now is the time. If your clients are on the fence, bring me something that we can work with. So kind of trying to drum up potentially multiple offers just to make sure that you don't miss a buyer who was just kind of waiting. And we do see that sometimes where buyers are hesitant to pull the trigger, and sometimes having an offer in hand can be that. Secondly, I like to obviously go over the offer. I review some dates, and then I send it to my clients via email, and I highlight some of the important ones, and then I try and give them a call, or I say, let's visit, at 2 p.m. this afternoon, or let me know when you have time to review this. We need a response by 5 p.m. tomorrow, or whatever it may be. So kind of scheduling a time to go over it with my clients. And then I also like to call the lender if it's a finance deal. I think it's really important to get a pre-qual letter or pre-approval letter would be better. Call the lender, chat with them, kind of get a feel for what they know from the potential buyers. And then I also like to call the listing agent.
Yeah.
So lots of calls, lots of due diligence, just to start to really get a feel for, well, who are we working with? How capable is the buyer? What is the situation? And what can make sense? Because there's a lot of little things that can make or break a deal in my mind. And it's my job to call and figure those things out. Dates can be really important for people, especially sellers. Maybe you're willing to give a little bit on price because you can stay in your home for one last Christmas.
Yep.
We've had that before where I've had a client be like, I'm not picky about this, but I need this. My family's coming to visit their family home one more time. We need this date. So they kind of paid for it a little bit, but it's what worked for them, and that's what made the deal happen. So kind of starting off with that, do you have anything you'd like to add? Or
my process is pretty similar. I have traditionally worked with a lot of clients that aren't necessarily local. So we don't always get the chance to make those offers, to present those offers in person. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I do just to, the offers here in Montana are 10, 11 pages. So I like to go through the offer on paper, hard copy, and highlight all the terms that are negotiable. There's a lot of boilerplate language in the offer.
That's not changing.
Right. But I like to highlight the terms, and that can include earnest money, certainly purchase price, the close date, inspection dates, and there's opportunity for a buyer's agent to write specific things and additional provisions. So if that is something like, seller wants to stay an additional week and we'll pay $2,500 rent, or, buyer would like that early possession for $2,500 or whatever, anything, highlight that so that it makes sure that my seller, it draws their attention to those terms and details.
Often where you'll see concessions asked for as well. So not uncommon in our market to see buyers asking for help towards either their closing costs or buying down an interest rate. Those would get written in there, and obviously can be a pretty key and pretty substantial piece. Sometimes that can be $20,000 that they're asking for. So we want to make sure that our sellers are, of course, aware of that.
Right.
And we are too.
Yeah. So I go through and I highlight the whole offer, and then just so that it's easy for you as a seller to review and look over and not get caught up in too much of the nuances of the boilerplate stuff. Then, of course, I do, like Kaila does, call the list agent. Make sure sometimes if you're working with a buyer that's made several offers, sometimes our wonderful forms might just throw a date in there. So I'll make sure that I'm confirming the dates with that buyer's agent. Then definitely call the lender and just make sure that the buyer's willing to or able to make the purchase. And then I usually send the email with that highlighted offer attached to the seller, and at the same time give them a call and say, hey, we've got this offer. I want to quick tell you the highlights, but then I want you to sit on it, look at it, mull it over, and we'll talk again a little bit later today or tomorrow, whatever. Certainly give them, I think one of the main things is the response time. That is kind of a key date when you get an offer, to know how long you have to respond, what you have to think about. So I do that, and that's like my initial process when I get the offer. I think it's great. Yes, if we've had a lot of activity on the property, second showings or other buyers that might be also borderline interested. Let them know that, hey, we've got this offer in our hand. We have until now to respond. If you'd like to bring an offer, it needs to be before this time and date. That's kind of that's where I end up, the first couple things that I do.
And so once you've reviewed things, made your phone calls, vetted, maybe also, again, called lenders, done all that, what are your next steps with your clients?
Right. So again, just kind of reviewing everything and then talking to them about, like, okay, is this date okay with you? Do you understand that the inspection is happening over these next 10 days? Are you going to be in town? Are you out of town? Do I need to help facilitate that inspection?
Do you have family visiting where the home won't be available for a certain amount of time? Because the buyer really does need to be able to have access to your home. Yes, they need to provide us with some notice, but the home needs to be relatively accessible and available during that time frame for them to do all the due diligence that they feel is necessary. They're allowed to look at anything and everything, and we just want to facilitate that so dates don't get pushed back, or there's nothing messing up with our timeline. Because I know that as a seller, really important to keep those dates, because you might have scheduled movers, paying for things, you're maybe closing on another house somewhere and you need funds from this. Can be a lot of moving pieces, so just setting yourself up for success there.
Right. And we want to, hopefully you as a seller have shared with us what your next steps are and what those goals are, so that we can help you remember, hey, now is the time to call the mover. While people say, oh, it's too early, we don't know yet, it's never too early to call the mover. You can get on their schedule and move that date as needed, but you want to get on their schedule, especially in a town the size of Bozeman. Finding a good mover, depending on whether it's across town or across country, it can take a little bit. And you might be horrified by what it costs to move. So you might want to do a lot of checking. And so it might take you more than just one phone call. So we want you to get started on that as soon as we've got that offer.
Yeah. And then next steps to me are, obviously crafting a counter. So I think we'll kind of talk about what dates we like to specifically look at, but starting to think about how we might respond to this offer.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of where we're at. Do you, what do you think are the 2 or 3 or whatever most important dates when it comes to analyzing an offer?
Yeah, so when you're looking at an offer for a seller, to me, number one date, or I guess number one thing, just kind of reading it as the form goes, is your purchase price, right? Taking a look at that purchase price and seeing, does that work for my client? Can we make it work, or what do we need to counter at to put this together, and seeing if we can maybe bring those a little bit closer, kind of altering that. I always like to look at earnest money. That to me is a real indicator of sometimes how serious a buyer is. I have seen really low earnest money sometimes that has worked, but in my mind, we want to typically see about 1%, occasionally more if it's honestly a higher purchase price, just because you're capable, and we want to know that the buyer is serious and not going to pull out for just any reason. We want to know that they're committed and paying attention to their dates. So it doesn't mean that a seller won't get their earnest money, but we want to make sure that that's at a reasonable time. We've actually countered on that specifically.
Yeah, I think that that's also when we're talking to, when we're making those initial phone calls, whether it's to the list agent or the lender, like, hey, this is a $500,000 house and they're putting down $1,000 earnest money. What gives?
Yeah.
Honestly, over the course of my career in different types of markets, maybe let's say where there's a lot of first-time home buyers, and they were doing loans for 2 or 3% down, so their down payment might have been $2,000 or $3,000, and they only put $500 down for earnest money. Well, that seems pretty low, but when you look at the whole picture, it is what it is. Mm-hmm. They're only buying a $300,000 house. That could be okay. Like you said, when the purchase price is higher, a $2 or $3 million home, you're expecting, I have taken $100,000 earnest money check, but that was in Wisconsin where the standard was more 10%. So yes, earnest checks do make a difference. That's definitely important to look at and to consider and to ask, why is it what
Get
it
a little
is?
bit more of the story, right?
Yeah.
That to me is a real key piece. I also obviously like to look at the closing date, because
Yeah.
that is the date that you as the seller need to be ready to leave the house. You needs to be clean, totally empty and ready to go morning of that date, better yet the night before, just so that there's no stress. You could sleep in the house that night, but morning you should be out of there, no problem. So making sure that that date works for you as the seller. And then inspections. That to me is one of my most crucial dates. I typically like to see about a 2-week inspection period. So the buyer has 2 weeks to do any sort of due diligence on the home. And then end of that 2 weeks, we want to have a notice from them. It's called an inspection notice that shares anything that they don't like from the property.
I think that inspection, so those to me are very certainly close date, but then the inspection notice date and then our response to the inspection notice, you really got to look at those dates carefully. If there's a holiday in between or if it's over a weekend, once I get that inspection for my seller and we discuss it, hey, they want a new hot water heater, they want the floors refinished, which is not okay because that is aesthetic and not health or safety.
I think for our market currently, I would agree. Yeah.
But they want some things that might take a bit of time. In the winter, last winter, I sold a home where they needed the septic tank pumped, and that just doesn't happen in the winter. So how are we going to handle that? So looking at all of those things, if we get an inspection notice on Friday and they want us to respond by Monday, we don't have any chance as the sellers to maybe call a handyman and say, how much will it cost to fix this? Or when do you have time to do it? Not that they would get it done over that weekend, but at least then we could confirm when we'll have these things done for the potential buyer.
Or at least help get you bid so that you can understand, am I comfortable taking on a $5,000 fix? Or is it going to be a $10,000 fix? And I really need to think a little bit more about it. So just kind of making sure that you have time to think, but also you don't want it to lag on. You don't want to be out in limbo for a long time. I always say as a seller, getting through inspection is one of your biggest hurdles. You're not at the closing table yet, but it is certainly a huge win to get past inspection as a seller.
Yeah.
And not that they're that scary. It's just, it's the time when things can change a lot.
And we're going to go over inspections in another video, but I think when it comes to the offer, we want to make sure that when that inspection notice comes in, that we have enough time to gather those bids on potential repairs that we would need and to do all that. So like I said, if it's over a holiday, we're going to need more days to respond. And so we want to really make sure that we've got enough time in there to do that.
Those are my big dates. There's, of course, some other smaller dates. There's the appraisal contingency. That's usually a number of days from when the buyer or the lender gets the appraisal in hand. To me, you need maybe 3 days to review an appraisal. Not something that would make or break it, but I think that would be typically what I'd like to see. And then same thing for your title contingency. Whenever the title company gets us the preliminary title commitment, the buyer should have about 3 days just to make sure that there's nothing crazy. Only time I would deviate on that is if it's maybe a bigger property or there's a lawyer that the buyer wants the lawyer involved. Sometimes giving a lawyer an extra few days, they don't typically like to work on a very quick time frame. Maybe we'll allow a few extra days there. Again, I always want to call the agent and see what is the reasoning behind your dates. Because if we can understand them, maybe it's an easy thing we can accommodate. But if there's no reason, I like to try and keep things
We do have
standard.
a lot of out-of-state buyers here in Bozeman. So sometimes if the buyer wants to attend the inspection and they were just here and left and they want to come back, sometimes, they can't come back for 2 weeks because of obligations wherever they're from. I think that, those kinds of things are okay to accommodate. Another thing that can benefit the seller is how we choose to allow continued marketing on the home if the buyer has asked for a really extended inspection period. And different types of properties, we're kind of zoning in on regular residential, but if it's a large piece of property with several outbuildings, or they want to do soil tests, or it's a vacant piece of land and they want to do some engineering tests done to make sure that the property is buildable, hey, that's going to take a little bit longer, not just to get the person out there, but then to get the report.
And that's, I think, the thing about Bozeman and Montana in general is there's just so many different types of properties. So there really is no hard rule. It is a case by case basis. But, I've been doing this for about 8 years. Kathy, you've been doing it for a long time as well.
22.
22. Yeah. So, leaning on that experience and letting us help you decide kind of what would those dates make sense for what type of property you have.
Yeah. So again, that's why you want a great agent. And I think there are specifics, but once we've sent you the offer, you've had some time to mull it over, and we get to have that more formal conversation, whether it's on the phone or in person. We'll tell you, hey, this date looks good, or hey, I think we should counter and extend that time period for our sake. Whatever. Those are the things that you want your agent to be able to do for you and guide you through.
Because you don't want to feel rushed, but you also don't want to feel like you're, again, lagging, waiting, dragging it out. So, have you ever made an offer to a seller? Or I'm sorry, have you ever made an offer to a buyer as a selling agent? Have you ever gone to a buyer's and brought them an offer on the home you're trying to sell?
Right. So that is something that you need to be comfortable with, but the idea is the same. So let's say we had accepted an offer, but for some reason that fell through. The buyers couldn't get financing, or who knows, family emergency, and they just had to pull out of the deal. But we knew that we had a couple other buyers that were interested. The number one reason, first of all, we're going to call those other buyers and say, hey, we fell out of contract. Are your people still interested? If that buyer's agent doesn't answer, the best way to get an answer from them is to write the contract back to their buyer, because they have to, by law, respond. So if that agent is, whatever,
Busy.
or thinks that the buyer is pointing the buyers towards another property or something like that, at least if we put it on paper and it's the same kind of offer, we write it for your terms as a seller, when you want to move out, how long you want the inspection period to be, what the purchase price would be, what kind of earnest money. We write the whole offer back to them, and the buyer can either accept it or counter, and we start the process again. But again, the best reason to do that is that you have to get, the buyer's agent has to respond.
It brings them back to the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And something I would just throw in, I typically recommend the same dates and time frame for my buyers that I recommend for my sellers. So it's not necessarily a one-sided thing that I heavily represent my buyers in this way or sellers in another way. I think some of these standards things make sense for both parties. It's not really a hardball kind of game.
Right.
I do find that finding kind of meeting in that middle ground, and again, some of these dates that we know and feel good about tend to work really well for both parties, which is really what you need to get a deal done.
Yeah.
You really do need to be negotiable and understanding and being able to see things from both sides. I think that's one of the agent's number one jobs. Sometimes it can feel like maybe your agent isn't totally advocating for your best interests, but just trust that part of your best interest is getting your home sold, and some of these things we've just seen and dealt with so often. So
yeah,
I just would throw that in there.
Yeah, I guess so. To me, that's probably the only time that we would write a counter or write an offer back to a buyer, but it can be done to bring people back to the game.
It's a cool trick.
Yeah. So the next question that I have is, if the offer is not acceptable on the surface, do you recommend a counter?
I always recommend a counter. So regardless, I would say, of what the offer looks like, we've had some offers that come in that feel really, I would say, offensive to a seller. Temperatures can rise and their blood can boil a little bit. Obviously, take a couple hours, take a walk around. And then I always recommend coming up with some sort of counter, even if that means you're countering very close to your asking price, or just kind of coming back to kind of what we typically like to see, and you don't really feel like it might go anywhere. Still think it's really important to always counter. I think it's number one, professional and a good business practice, because you never know. You said it, Kathy, you don't ever want a deal to die on our desk. And I think it's important to just, again, you do want to sell your home. So let's put what terms would work for you. See where it lands. It might not go anywhere, but I think it's always important to give it the chance.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, some agent a long time ago taught me that don't let a deal die on your desk.
Mm-hmm. It's a good saying.
So I encourage my sellers to counter if it's at like a serious lowball and it truly is insulting. I have encouraged my sellers to counter at full price. Just put out there, hey, we're serious about this as our price. we can't take you seriously where you came in. Sometimes it continues to go. There are people out there, buying and selling anything. There's personality involved.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to remember that when you're negotiating. Somebody's tactic might seem insulting to you, but it just might be how they've negotiated throughout their lifetime, and they don't mean any harm. It's just how they do it. So I think that's why we always encourage a counter. Keep the conversation open.
And I know something I've done when we've seen those super low counters, occasionally I will attach my comps list. So again, when we're pricing your home, it's not just a number you're pulling out of thin air. I'm looking at recent solds and where we're getting this number. And so I will sometimes, again, call that agent and be like, I also attach the comps that we have, and you can see that we're priced based off of those. So please share that with your client.
Or vice versa, asking the buyer's agent, hey, thanks for the offer. It seems really low. Where did you get the information?
Yeah. So I think, again, trying to bring it back into some data, because again, emotions can railroad things, but that's our job, is to help tone it down and keep it moving forward as best we can.
Yeah. So what else do you have?
I think that goes over offers.
Okay. I do have one other thing here. Just once the offer is accepted, who does what next? What starts happening?
Yeah. So for me as the listing agent, number one, I'm going to open escrow. So I will send our executed contract to the title company that we've chosen and the closing officer that we typically like to work with. And I'll ask them to open escrow. And then I'll also keep an eye out for earnest money. Typically, we want to see that within 3 days.
But as the seller's agent, the buyer should have written into the contract who they want to use as title. So I guess what happens once the offer is accepted? Who does what next?
So once an offer is accepted, I, as a listing agent, like to open escrow with the title company, and then also like to track and make sure earnest money gets deposited within, typically 3 days, whatever's in our contract. Also for you as the seller, I think it's time for you to start really making sure that your home is ready for inspection. So hopefully this was done a little bit before listing. So again, making sure all light bulbs work so the inspector isn't calling out potential electrical problems, making sure that your water's on if you have a vacant home, making sure that the inspector has access to your attic or your basement, making sure there's no heavy things on top. I once saw that
to kind of go back to when we prepped your home for sale, we warned you what the inspector would want to go through, like underneath your sinks and stuff like that, so that's all ready. And then just, again, making sure that you're aware of the dates that those inspections are going to go off. So if you've got dogs or kids or whatever that need to be somewhere, that they are.
Make sure that the house is available for all the inspections.
Yeah.
I usually recommend to sellers, let's make sure we get through the inspection period. That is often our biggest hurdle. So I think that's our next goal.
Yeah. So I don't know. There one last one. I think we're good.
I think that's it.
So thank you for watching this, and our next
series will be on focusing on the inspections and other appointments that they might have. We'll see you there.
Okay. Thanks.